Okay, looks like we are live on YouTube now.
Excellent.
I'll go ahead and start recording now as well, since it's recording on YouTube.
Good. Did you have to trim the last one to upload it?
No, I didn't. It was, I think the one that caused the trouble for uploading was like a day-long meeting or something like that. It seems like
That's a
under 2
lot.
hours is not so bad, yeah. Um, yeah, it was pretty quick and easy to get that uploaded.
Cool. Hey, James.
Hey, I'm gonna go off video for a sec, but I'm here.
Here. Awesome. We've got Leah, Emily, and Doria also expected. So we'll just give them a moment. And then we'll do the front end fluffy stuff and then the roll call. Oh, good. I think this makes quorum for us. Good morning, Emily.
Okay, good morning.
Okay, let's get rolling. Hopefully we get Leah and Doria to pop on in a minute or two. Can you expand for us, Caleb?
There's been a delay.
A slight delay. It's
Yep.
thinking. Hasn't had its coffee yet. Okay, here we go. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to California Agricultural Land Equity Task Force. This is a meeting of the Land Tenure Subcommittee. We are scheduled today from 10 to 12 p.m. I'm not sure if we'll use the full time, but we have 2 hours if we need it. My name is Megan Wiley. I'm a facilitator with California State University, Sacramento, providing facilitation support to the task force. And our excellent staff with California Strategic Growth Council, we're all here today providing staff support. We've got Ms. Camille Frazier and Caleb Swanson in the OPR meeting room for folks who would like to join in person, and Tessa Salzman from a remote office. And here comes our subcommittee task force members all trickling in. Participation guidelines. We are here to share, listen, learn, exchange ideas, brainstorm, respect different perspectives. All ideas have value, and staying on point, of course, is always an important one for subcommittee meetings. Today's topic is land tenure. Next slide. Public comment. If you're joining us as a member of the public and you're interested to provide comments during our agenda sessions today, we have 2 sessions, a working session and a general public comment session. You can complete the form at this website here, or what's actually easier is if you just use your raised hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen when we get to those designated public comment periods, and that way we know you'll want to jump into the discussion queue. We'll let you know when to unmute your microphone and share your comment. You will see the chat, the Q&A box today. That's just for technical questions. We don't have use of the chat, and we're not able to respond to comments from public members that are in the Q&A. So if you did happen to use that, we'll just let you know that you'll have to read your comment for the record, because we do record these sessions and post them to the website. We're live streaming from YouTube too as we speak. Next slide. Standard Zoom. People are muted upon entry, but you have the ability to mute and unmute yourself, and free-flowing dialogue. But if we're hearing background noise, we'll just kindly ask you to help us by putting yourself back on mute when you're done speaking. Cameras are optional, but I love seeing faces and smiles. So if you're feeling up for it this morning, would love to see your face. And we just talked about the raise hand feature. So task force members, of course, you're welcome to use the raise hand feature, but we have a small group and this is a nice collegial space for dialogue. So just feel free to jump in with questions and comments when they come to you. Next slide. Our plan for today is a quick review and approval of the September 9th meeting summary. That was when we last met as a subcommittee. And then we've got the full rest of the time together as a working session where we've got some draft language related to land tenure that's under consideration for the report, some ideas and concepts that we'll be exploring together. We'll also get some updates on the tasks that staff has been working on at the direction of subcommittee members. And then spend some time reviewing some of these recommendations pertaining to land owner-tenant relationships. Of course, before we close out, we'll review action items and confirm next steps as a group and make space for general public comment. Next slide. Okay, quick roll call. I'm going to go down my list. Please unmute yourself and say here present. Vice Chair Emily Bergenio.
Here.
Member James Nakahara.
Here.
Member Leah Schwartzman.
Here.
Member Nathaniel Brown.
Here.
Wonderful. Quorum is established. Not yet with us today, but also a subcommittee member is member Doria Robinson. Next slide. Okay, approval of the summary. Let me just pause and see if any task force member would like us to bring up the September 2024 meeting summary for discussion. If you have any edits you would like to propose.
I think I had one. Hold on, let me go back. I'm on the agenda.
Okay, we can pull it up if helpful.
Oh no, I have it. It's fine. I should have wrote it down, so I'll just say yeah, I'm not sure what it is. I'll probably abstain when we approve them.
Okay, and if something comes to you and we need to make a revision to the notes at our next meeting, we can do that as well. Let's just pause and see if there's any public comment on the draft September meeting summary.
There is no public comment.
Okay. Emily, by chance, did you find where you would like to propose a revision?
No, I don't have it on hand. Sorry.
No problem. Okay, then is there a motion to approve the draft summary as written, or potentially a motion to postpone approval while we wait for suggested edits? Depending on what you all like to do.
Can we postpone till like later today, like this afternoon, or I mean like the back hour?
I think we would have to re-put the action on the top of the agenda for the next meeting because we're bound by Bagley-Keene rules and we have
Right.
to go in sequential order. So we could, Emily could abstain if you all want to move forward and approve, or you can just decide as a group to postpone approval and we put it as an action for the next meeting.
I don't have a strong preference.
Someone has to decide.
What do you think, Emily?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda, or not the agenda, the September meeting minutes.
Excellent. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Excellent. Okay, there's been a motion to approve the meeting summary and by Vice Chair Burgenio, a second by Member Schwartzman. I'll go around the room and ask members to state their agreement with an aye or opposition with a nay or abstention. Let's start with Member Leah Schwartzman.
Aye, aye.
Vice Chair Burgenio.
Aye.
Member Nakahara.
Aye.
Member Brown.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. The meeting summary is approved. We'll turn that to final and get the final version posted to the project website. Excellent. Next up, working session. Okay, so Caleb has really been working on the work of the land tenure group. So we're going to turn it over to Caleb to help guide us through these conversations.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'll kick off the working session with some quick staff updates. First, we are working on finding a time to have a guest speaker presentation with the Indian Land Tenure Foundation. So just noting that that is in the work. And then regarding the Subdivision Map Act and the discussion that was had during the last subcommittee meeting about that, staff are working to locate someone within LCI, the sister agency to the Strategic Growth Council, to identify someone that might be able to help provide some greater clarity on those questions. So we are still working on that request as well. I'll move on unless there's anyone has any questions or concerns with these quick staff updates. Yeah, Leah, go ahead.
If you're having trouble, and I could look through my email, there was somebody who was presenting on the topic of the Subdivision Map Act through the Association of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers. They had offered an educational opportunity around that, and they did obviously have a speaker who was a specialist. So if you're having trouble, I don't recall who that person is. I could try to find it in my email. I had attempted to send my team, but we were unable to attend. So if that's helpful, I can try to dig that up. But the Association of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers is who put that on.
Thank you, Leah. That'd be really helpful because we have been trying to get in contact with them, and so it would just be, if you do have a contact there, that would be helpful to share with us for a few different reasons. So thank you for sending that along.
And I know these two entities were the ones that Leah and I recommended at our last meeting. And now that we have some more members that joined us today, if they have any also recommendations, maybe now or at a later time via email, you can recommend to bring a guest speaker in. It wasn't cut and dry. It's just what was recommended at the last one in September.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a time built out for kind of next steps, kind of at the end of the meeting. So I think after today's discussion as well, we can follow up on if there might be any guest speaker ideas or further kind of action items that we'd like to take. Perfect. So the kind of, as Megan highlighted in our kind of review of the agenda, the hope for today is to review the work or the report draft that was sent out last night. So not expecting that anyone would have had time to kind of dig into that or look at the land tenure section, but hoping that we can spend some time today to be able to do some of that kind of initial kind of review or thought work. So I first putting up here.
Hey, Caleb, who sent that out last night? I was looking for it.
Megan.
Megan did.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. The land tenure portion of that draft will be at the very bottom of that document, if that helps locate it quicker. But here on screen is the high level outline of the land tenure section of that portion of the report. the items here on screen just represent the headings that were in that report. So not including all the information in context and everything that would be associated with these, but just wanted to highlight that this is kind of the general bare bones structure of that section, and wanted to see if there's anything that initially stands out to this subcommittee in terms of things that might be missing, things that they're grateful to have included, things that they think would be important to discuss further. And I'll note that staff have identified potentially some areas of potential gaps that the subcommittee might be interested in as well, which we can talk about on the next slide. But wanted to pause here, see if there are first any initial reactions.
It looks like on the email, there's 2 of them.
It's probably an attachment as a Word document and as a PDF, Emily, and that was just,
Okay.
yeah, just for your preferred review format. Yeah, sorry.
Oh,
for
you're
that
right.
confusion with that.
Yeah, I'm looking on my phone, so you're right. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that could be confusing.
I don't have any feedback as we received it last night.
Great.
Some additional context just for right now, and Emily, to your point, and as Caleb was saying, the draft for your consideration and review for the February meeting, right? Of course, that just came out. So the timing with the subcommittee meeting is a little bit tough because no one's anticipating you had the chance to read through those pieces of that report yet. So I think to Caleb's point, right now, what we were thinking we could use the subcommittee time for would be just overarching responses to structure, to ideas. And note that any of the feedback that you do all give today will of course not then be in the February draft that people are reading and reviewing. So it would be something that staff are like consolidating and accumulating as we get your feedback and thoughts. And that then becomes part of the revisions process following the February meeting. Does that make sense? That the timelines are a bit tough, given that this subcommittee meeting happened after we wanted to get that full 2 weeks of review for task force members for February. I hope that makes sense. And one other bit of context that might be important here, you might be noting that some of the things on this list are would have been under the purview of the land use governance and sovereignty, right, dimension of land access, of land equity, as we had been conceiving them. And in the process of streamlining the report draft, we ended up putting recommendations into 2 buckets: land access and acquisition, of which ancestral land return is a key part of that, along with land access and acquisition for other communities, and then land tenure. And sovereignty actually ends up in kind of both of those in different ways. So I wanted to highlight that for you. You'll see here advanced sovereignty for California tribal nations, incentivize equitable governance, things like that. And those we're putting under this land tenure category, because they're about what, once you have access to that land, how can you maintain that access? Who has decision-making power in those relationships? That's another important note here. Do these high-level categories feel like they map onto how land tenure relates to the objective that the task force has for equitable agricultural land access and tenure? Do these broad categories map on to that dimension?
I think so. I think, yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting, like this also, like I did get a chance to look a little bit at some of the recommendations, and I think there's like cross-pollination there too. But I think, yeah, I think the only thing that I would maybe add is just or modify would be around like I'm not seeing infrastructure called out here as like a piece of land tenure, which I mean it kind of depends on how we're slicing land tenure, but I could see if we're talking about, support adequate housing on agricultural land, then maybe it should be housing and infrastructure. But besides that, I think I would thumbs up this list.
To add to what James has said, I think housing, infrastructure, equitable access to water resources. And I'm also, the second bullet point, I feel like is almost there. I feel like it's more than equitable governance and easements and covenants, but I haven't finished my thought on that yet. So let me mull it around a little bit.
Thank you both. That's exactly the helpful feedback. And Ted's visibly taking notes there, so we'll be capturing these comments.
We can always come back to kind of this broader outline as well, but I'll go ahead and move on to this next session or this next slide, which has the question that we just posed to you, but also has two ideas that were shared at the last subcommittee meeting that perhaps this subcommittee would like to take on, with those being climate change and insurance. So first want to pause and see if climate change and insurance are also topics that would maybe fit into the land tenure section of the report, or if there are associated context or recommendations that the task force would like to elevate in its report regarding climate change and insurance, just really trying to build out kind of those ideas that were briefly highlighted last meeting.
From, I guess, what I think of when I hear climate change and insurance, I still just kind of think of capital and infrastructure to, support what comes up. And the like unrestricted funds to be able to say, hey, no, this isn't for some grant that I have to spend it within this year. It's something that I can sit on and wait for the right moment. Is oftentimes the case with land acquisition. When you're put under a timeline, it makes all the difference. Just some thoughts that came to mind. I'm trying to get the slide pulled up for that last list. Let's take a screenshot.
So Nathaniel, am I understanding you correctly that these feel like they're related to other like resource challenges, right? And the need for timely and flexible capital, right? To be able to address whatever arises. Is that kind of what these seem as related to that piece?
Yeah, and almost like I don't want to say unrestricted resources, but it's like if we need to create these, quote unquote restrictions, it's like maybe about naming all these different resources, like Leah said, like water, just making sure that the resources is broad enough that when we're saying this, it's not just one or two. Or like that it has to be like, how do I form this around climate change? How do I form my problem around climate change? Like, there's a lot of different ways it shows up in all the different areas in California.
And I think actually part of the conversation would be helpful to actually name some of those things, Nathaniel, if you'd like. I hear you saying like there's a need to be really flexible so each farmer can respond in their unique way. But if you are able to share some more details, I think that'd be helpful.
I guess, again, with the more unrestricted or like, not unrestricted, but like you have to be able to be flexible of like, maybe this $100,000 doesn't all go towards what can be looked at as, fighting climate change. Some of it's for a, I mean, I don't know. I guess water. I just want to echo the water piece. I think there's so many different ways it comes up, and it's just about having money to be nimble. Water and permits for environmental. I mean, even when we talked yesterday about just like doing the work in like tribal communities and like making sure we are all understanding how to get these environmental tests and permits to move forward our projects faster so we could, not be always on wait in this questioning space. And I think that if we name those kind of things, it does allow like, hey, your money can be used for any of these sort of permits that you need to start to just inquire about if this property is even going to be good. Like, if there's not money up front to do the buying or the like transfer and thinking about it, it's money that's after the fact that takes the project longer to keep going.
Thank you. That's helpful.
There have been, I think we've talked about bringing someone who can maybe talk about the new insurance rules in California. Obviously, farmers are having a lot of trouble getting insurance. This is deeply tied to the issue of climate change. So just understanding whether those new rules actually served farmers, and whether or not there are additional recommendations around insurance access and affordability that we can add to the plate here. And another not fully fleshed out thought is, we were discussing climate change as it relates to kind of where a lot of this pool of money is going to be coming from is actually more related to how agriculture can be a solution to climate resilience, and that farmers are the first line of defense on the ground in making real efforts towards climate resilience in California and fire mitigation and all of these really ways that we can discuss conservation practices, fire mitigation practices, regenerative agriculture as part of a larger set of tools that we have to fight climate change. So again, not fully fleshed out thoughts, but we were trying to connect those dots a bit more. I think a lot of times in our circle of conversation, that is a given. Like, we know farmers to be that, especially the small and medium scale producers that are the producers that we're focusing on within this task force, not the large scale producers who aren't as much a solution to climate change and aren't who we're talking about here in the task force. So we know that as a given. That is not necessarily as widely known outside of our bubbles. So really, making those connections that ultimately land equity is climate resilience.
I really appreciate you saying that. And I think even just from my stance, I'm like, yeah, it's a given, but it's always so hard to relay these things and like make my situation fit. And as far as like, I feel pretty knowledgeable to the resources that are all out there and like in my different circles, but like I will say insurance is the last thing. I haven't really been able to grapple with that. Like, yes, for my own business, but not for like crops or the work that, sometimes takes a lot longer when you're doing regenerative agriculture and just more, not even just regenerative agriculture, just more thought out long-term land stewardship. So yeah, appreciate you saying that.
So I hear a lot of the value that land equity can provide when it comes to building climate resiliency and sustainability. But as you mentioned, Leah, climate change and insurance being heavily intertwined in a lot of different ways. And I threw up on the PowerPoint slide here some of the few examples of the ways that climate change might be impacting or might impact California's farmers in the future. And so I wonder if we could expand upon the question that I have on that second bullet in terms of thinking through maybe what priority communities might need in terms of land access and tenure to adapt to a changing climate. Kind of how might the report that the task force is developing kind of highlight the needs that a changing climate might create or is creating for the priority communities of the task force?
I think I stopped paying attention for a brief moment. Was there a prompt question or are we reflecting? Because I have thoughts about all these, but want to make sure I don't start talking in a rambling way.
No, please go ahead and share.
What did you give us a prompt though prior besides just read?
Just kind of the second bullet point really being kind of that prompting question, what might be needed by priority communities? But happy to hear thoughts on anything related to the subject.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'll just say is that it becomes a little bit of a chicken and an egg thing with some of this around like, well, land access and land tenure needs to happen before adapting to climate change, and people are adapting to climate change on whatever land they happen to be on right now, regardless. But in terms of what priority communities need in terms of land access and tenure, it's a broader level of resource allocation to support across the entire gamut of things that happen during climate change. So, or, during an event, because there's slow climate change, there's the gradual increase in temperatures every year, like sea level rise, all those things. There's also like, we had a tornado for the first time in Santa Cruz County 3 weeks ago, and like, or a month ago or something. Like, there's going to be more, I mean, obviously wildfire, all these things. And so I almost think that there's like and kind of concordantly, like the solutions to both of those move at a similar pace, where like there's kind of long-term soil development practices that create less erosion and make topsoil more resilient to intense rain events. And at the same time, if a levee bursts, people need like a place to stay and emergency funding, and we don't know how strong FEMA is going to be over the next couple of years. So things like that are what come to mind for me. I know it was a little all over the place.
How would you say, well, that's helpful, James. How would you say the issue of land tenure relates to those things? Is land tenure just the basis on which a farmer would be able to respond to those? I'm trying to kind of stitch together how those factors you just laid out might belong in the report, if they do.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, in some ways, they're little apples and oranges, because land tenure is about what happens when you get the land. There's like land access, land tenure. Once you're tenuring the land. I don't know if that's a real phrase, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, to me, this also speaks a little bit to like access to the broader network of kind of technical assistance that's out there that people don't always know about as being like one solution to adapting to when there are these like intense events. Yeah, I'm not sure.
I think as far as I just want to echo what you're saying in the beginning of that was like land access is kind of first in most instances. There is some like good examples of long-term land tenure without there being the ownership. But especially when there's a disaster, that's gonna affect that like viability and then relationship possibly, because things could be, I mean, I'm just kind of trying to put myself in the shoes of folks that are in these kind of wildfire situations. It's like if you have to start up from the bottom, it's like the smaller you are, the harder it's going to be. And if you don't own that land, then there's no like equity to pull. There's no insurance that you're holding that you're getting paid out. It's the landowner that's going to have that insurance that's going to pay out for those things. And maybe for crop, but again, that's like for as small of farming I'm doing, it's like I don't have crop insurance. And it's so yeah, I just echoing the land access is, or the land ownership is or agreements, even long-term land tenure agreements that are solid to name these climate change and just like flexibility. It's like that's what can, I'm hoping, give me even access to more crop insurance and things of that nature. Like yeah, so
Yeah, I can build off of what Nathaniel just said too, really like the discussion about land tenure being more than land ownership, that there are other secure ways to access land, but that those ways need to be ensured to be secure, so that previous kind of equity in landowner tenant interaction, like that, can be beefed up. We can talk about different ways to kind of incentivize or mandate better land security, better lease agreements. We can facilitate longer term access to land. We can get to the bottom of whether equity building leases are legal in California by answering the Subdivision Map Act question. But ultimately what Nathaniel's saying is, like, without longer term land access, folks are either not able to or shouldn't invest in some of these longer term infrastructure pieces that build climate resilience, building soil, maintaining the bordering forested lands. I mean, so many things that they either wouldn't have access to the funding sources for because their tenure is insecure, or shouldn't be investing in that because their tenure is insecure and they would lose their investment. And then, again, like, it just being incentivized when you have a longer term secure agreement that you can build off of. So yeah, without that piece, the other things don't, the chicken or the egg that James was talking about.
And it's almost like you get normally a bunch of eggs at one time that hatch. And then it's like, really, you've got a bunch of these chickens running around, and I mean, what comes first? I mean, you got to get a tractor nearly immediately after getting onto the land to do any of the things to restore or, move your stuff around, move rubble around, and, rebuild in most of these cases, or even just, start. So yeah, I feel like the naming some of that infrastructure in that climate resilience is big because I mean, even I think people take the I think we take the land acquisition or access or purchase, and we think of, just the transfer, just the title, and really it's like testing and configuring, and I mean, it's really not complete until all the infrastructure is there as well.
I
Just
don't
speaking
know
from-
exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry. I don't know exactly how we legislate like better land tenure agreements, but I think that we can certainly start with, like, I think we had an idea to have kind of a agricultural tenants bill of rights. And I think that we can create best practices for publicly owned lands that are leased. And I think that we can support and fund technical assistance providers and grants for farmers to seek the assistance of service providers like lawyers to help them secure better language within their agreements and empower them to negotiate better terms for their agreements that facilitate the adoption of climate resilient practices and have more security in their leases and have language that secures infrastructure owned by tenants that's permanent to the land and increases the value of the landowner's property. So there are ways that we can try to get at that issue.
I second everything from Leah and Nathaniel. I'm just having a realization too that I'm wondering, like, this is like in my head when I'm thinking about land equity and kind of the way we've been talking about it as part of the task force, and I've been thinking a lot about, land that we want to land that can transition to land, et cetera, and otherwise. But I guess I'm wondering, as a potential solution to this, like, could there be a mechanism by which we're actually utilizing property taxes from high value properties throughout the state, a very small amount, to help like subsidize some type of climate resiliency fund or some type of emergency relief thing, where we're actually kind of thinking about all of the land and how it can be used in support of kind of the goals that we have around agricultural land. I have no idea if that's tenable or what, but like, because in some ways, one part of this discussion is like, what's the role of land equity for the entire state? Like, how do we best manage land in order to in order to ensure that the values alignment that we hope to make into policy recommendations gets kind of manifested. And so yeah, I don't know, just something for the hopper. Because it would be interesting if there was a way, because the other thing is like a lot of the solutions we're talking about need to come from like grants or loans or these other like less stable financial options that kind of come and go. And I mean, one thing we're seeing a lot like today is like when federal funding gets frozen or things like that, there are really dramatic immediate impacts in some of these communities that we work with. And so yeah, I'm just curious if there's a way we can build in some kind of sustained financial mechanisms through the taxation of, properties that tend to earn high, they pay more in property taxes kind of thing. And anyways, it's kind of a wild idea, but let's explore it if we can.
Are you thinking, James, like just I guess what comes to mind is, are you thinking agricultural properties as well as non-agricultural properties
I was
with
thinking
that
more like
tax?
non-agricultural properties. Like what I'm thinking of is like, well, like there's a ton of property tax base in, affluent, wealthy communities. Like, is there a way to appropriate a small percentage of that tax revenue to stabilize the goals that we have around agricultural land equity in the state of California? Like, if 4 cents of every property tax dollar from urban areas could go towards supporting a climate resiliency fund for socially disadvantaged and historically marginalized farmers, so that when there are these like fast and crazy climate issues that come up, people have a pot of money to rely on that's state controlled and maybe like overseen by the SGC or something like that, or something like that, something akin to that, to create more of like a relief funding. Because like I know a couple of years ago, after the 2022 winter, when CAF had like disaster funding, that went relatively smoothly. I mean, it wasn't as complicated as going through FEMA, by a large margin. So something kind of modeled on that, but then how to create a fund that exists in perpetuity that can grow, or that can help. Maybe there's some combination where it's seeded by social impact philanthropy, but then the tax revenue plus the interest on the endowment is what gets used to create the fund, or something like that. Just a lot of different ways to like, but how to utilize kind of some of the higher revenued parcels in the state to like help support this other piece of something that's very important. Or like, I don't know, I mean, there could be incentives too. It doesn't necessarily need to be like just there could be something like carbon credits or something, some kind of similar type. I mean, I have mixed feelings about carbon credits, but yeah, That's kind of what I was thinking. I really, it's just an idea. I don't know how tenable that is legally, or how that falls with
Gotcha.
you, but
I like the idea, and I think that where my mind went was like agricultural lands that are just being like either fallowed and used as a tax write-off and or places that are, larger companies or organizations that own an extreme amount of land that are degrading the soil. It is the, opposite of that. I mean, some could argue that a lot of that is causing a lot of climate change. And if there would be like an incentive on that side to, pay some sort of tax to, it's almost kind of like it'd be like a reverse carbon credit. So like paying for the carbon that they're shooting into the air. And I think that's where my mind is at, because just from personal experience, it's like we're this little Adujama Farmer Collective. We're this trying to build out this little oasis of 22 acres in the midst of 50 and 100-acre parcels that are, just doing corn, wheat, or tomatoes. And it's it makes conservation, it makes all the other things that much more difficult. So it's like, I don't know, maybe it would bring some awareness to the bridging that gap, because, I think there will be a time that the lands just need to be restored versus just being able to keep taking and taking and taking.
totally. I mean, I think kind of a carrot and stick model in which, like, let's say you're a mega business and you happen to have a bunch of fallow land that ostensibly could be used for agriculture, that there is some incentive structure to encourage you to actually manage that land with cover crops, or doing some type of fallow management to encourage carbon sequestration or prevent erosion, or preserve biodiversity, any of those things. And for the smaller scale grower who's like farming, incentives to encourage them and help them pay for those things too.
Mhm.
Like a both and then for the people who are like, no, I don't want to do any of that. I'm just going to leave it bare ground for the entire year, and like that there's some kind of thing of like, okay, well then, there's going to be X, Y, or Z repercussion of that related to your tax base, or penalties or fees or something like that. Again, like I think there's this abuts against like property rights a lot, which are complicated. So I don't know exactly what can be done there, but I do think that like some kind of mechanisms that work both ways will probably lead to the best outcomes, hopefully.
In the interest of time, I think that there was a lot of great discussion there, and we've taken a lot of notes on this, and so we'll kind of reflect on the notes and see what we can kind of make of them. But I want to go to Leah, your discussion earlier about the need for increased equity in landowner tenant relationships. I'm going to quickly scroll past insurance, maybe, and pulled out the recommendations that were in the landowner tenant relationships section of the report. And I think it would be great to particularly spend some time thinking about the first and second recommendation here. I also have, just so that we are aware, I've got two more back here kind of regarding technical assistance providers assisting as mediators and ensuring adding some mediation services. But maybe want to start here and think through the first recommendation of a tenant farmer bill of rights. Maybe if we could identify what some of those rights might be, and try to put some meat onto that skeletal bone of that idea. Actually gonna pop out and I'll take some notes on the screen.
There's quite a lot there. There's probably a few that we could borrow from like residential tenant bill of rights as well. So it'd be good to kind of look at that, I think. But I think that right to harvest is important. I think that actually enshrining in a tenant bill of rights a very obscure rule that has like one example of precedence from the 60s that I've found, which is that if a lease continues without objection for 60 days, that it is considered an annual renewal on the most recent agreement between parties. So basically, it's an automatic renewal if there's no objection. That is something that has precedence but isn't actually written down anywhere. So it'd be great to actually have that to fall back on and not just be like, you could possibly take this to court if you wanted to, but that'll be expensive and no one's going to do that. Yeah. I don't exactly know how to make this something enforceable or not, but that any agricultural lease cannot be terminated without 60 days notice. Farms don't move that fast. There's probably a whole lot more that I could add to this list, but those are like the very top ones. There's certainly some climate resilience pieces. We could include things like, force majeure as being a recommended practice, dispute resolution as being a recommended practice, meaning that folks have to engage in mediation services before seeking attorneys and legislate and yeah, anyway. James, your turn.
Yeah, I was just looking through some tenant agreements to be like, what are some things that I think are really important? I mean, there's like the standards of like the non-discrimination protections and all of those things, but I think fair and clear lease agreement, like the language of the lease agreement should be kind of plain spoken if possible. Sometimes legalese gets really confusing and ends up being used to kind of manipulate agreements.
Requiring that if you're working with a tenant who does not read English, that they're required to provide a version of the lease in the language of their choosing. Sorry.
Definitely,
James.
no, I agree with that. I agree with the extended lease terms. It just like I totally think that when relationships are being developed, it's okay to do something that's on the shorter term than the longer term because both parties have kind of this vested interest in seeing how things go. But after like a 2 or 3 year period, yeah, I think 5 to 10 years could, if that's like standardized in any way, plus the like if there's no explicit non-renewal that things renew, rent stability, kind of like fixing prices to something that ensures that low income farmers are able to still make payments. Let's see.
I think there are some things that we could have, like maybe different Bill of Rights or different kind of mandates for like publicly owned lands. Like we can have a whole lot more mandate on publicly owned lands than for private landowners. So that would be fun to craft. Because we could have mandates that after, an initial trial period, that leases, cannot be less than a particular period of time, and mandate different kinds of dispute resolution language. A lot of the leases that are used on public lands are absolutely onerous and no one could ever understand them ever, which necessitates an intermediary organization to actually be the shield between the public agency and smaller farmers. That's not necessarily the worst thing, but we need to facilitate that and support those organizations and breed more of those organizations to act as that shield. So yeah, there's definitely a lot harder we could go on public lands mandates and a Bill of Rights or best practices.
Yeah, it would almost be interesting to do this exercise for each of the types of land tenure frameworks that we think could be, the if we took the three most likely frameworks, which would probably be private land, public land, and well, I mean, maybe it's just two, or maybe it's like private land, public land, land managed by a land trust, like that could be, because like land trust tenure is going to be different than private landowner tenure, which is going to be different from public land tenure. So even if it was just those three models of like what would be the important things to have be kind of the Bill of Rights for those.
I do tend to put
ahead.
land trusts in the institutional landowner bucket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I could see us just doing two. There's like public institution and private or something like that, or three. Yeah. Compliance too is the back end of this that I'm curious about, just like how compliance happens, whether that's through the county or like there probably needs to be some kind of oversight around when, like, where do the complaints go, I guess, like if somebody is in a situation where it's not like they're leasing land and everything was copacetic around the formation and maybe the first couple of months, but then something happens. I mean, there are mechanisms already. There's OSHA and there's there's the planning and public health. There's lots of different places, but like, yeah, just once we design these, I think revisiting compliance would be interesting.
And enforcement, like I have a lot of conversations with folks about the development of the lease being really about relationship building, because the reality is that if a tenant has a landowner who's not in compliance with their lease, what is their recourse? They do not have the financial ability to take that person to court.
Right.
So what is the enforcement, and how can that enforcement be free for tenants to make sure that that landholders are held accountable? And especially if that enforcement is with a public agency or an institution, that is extremely daunting. It takes really brave tenants to lease from public institutions. It's very David and Goliath. So how do we better support tenants and the intermediary organizations that are often helping to facilitate that relationship?
I am so sorry, but I have to jump off. I could only do an hour today. There's some some issues with federal freeze spending that we're trying to navigate with some of our clients. Anyways, it's great seeing everybody. Sorry I have to dip out. I will check the notes and I will keep thinking too and pass along anything I think of, but great discussion.
Yeah, thanks, James.
Thanks, James.
I mean, do we need a working group that's gonna like dig through the Bill of Rights and like sketch it out?
I didn't want to propose that, Leah, because it was just yesterday you joined one more working group. But it does feel like there need to be people in a document shaping this, right? So a working group would be a good way to do that.
Is Dorian in this subcommittee?
No.
No. Well, I'll volunteer James. He just left, so. Yeah, I think also starting with residential tenant Bill of Rights as a guide to us, you know, and having a document kind of ready for review. I bet James will say yes. And I, you know, if we keep it to a short period of time, I would say yes to that too.
I think this working group could definitely be a short-term arrangement that is kind of focused on one main task that can be accomplished in a short period of time. So.
And I think what would be important and be interested to hear, you know, subcommittee members' ideas here for that effort would be how might this or how should this be packaged as part of the recommendations to the governor and legislature, right? So really what level of detail is important for the specific ask, the specific recommendation that the task force wants to put forward. And as you were speaking, the kind of compliance and enforcement piece of it felt really important there, right? So both following best practices and then a decision could be made about how detailed those best practices should be outlined in the report itself, or maybe as an amendment or something like that, right? Amendment, what words, what are words? And then also what are the pieces that are like very specific, actionable, you know, like requests that would go to the governor and legislature. So that would just be another important part, I think, for this group to consider.
Tessa, I see you're unmuted. Do you want to jump in?
Oh, no, sorry. I mean, I guess the only thing I was gonna say is that we just have a really great list that was just brainstormed, already written down. So it'll be easy to add that to a Google Doc and then yeah, take the next steps that you all just mentioned. So that's all.
Yeah. I think that was great. And we can move on to the bullet point underneath it. And of course, we can always come back if ideas come to someone. But there was a lot of discussion when we were talking about climate change as well as to the incentives or disincentives that tenants' land tenure can have on their ability or willingness to invest in certain kind of climate initiatives, but also more broadly, other wealth creating mechanisms that they might want to engage in or consider engaging in if they had a more secure form of land tenure. And so one of the recommendations that we currently have in the report is to develop mechanisms allowing tenant farmers to retain the monetary value associated with improvements made to leased land. And was curious if we could do some brainstorming on what those mechanisms might look like, or if there are any other thoughts, concerns, or ideas kind of around this recommendation.
I would just make a distinction to here that perhaps we're talking about permanent capital improvements in land. Or are we also talking about other improvements that are more not short term? Like there's a discussion about how to calculate the value of soil improvements to land. So there's a lot of places we could kind of take this. And I want to say that originally this was in relation to development leases and this Subdivision Map Act question. And so that is a very particular bucket that's usually talking about housing or barns. So appreciable assets versus depreciable assets that we might be talking about here. So, depreciable asset, still a really important investment, like a well and pump. I don't know where soil would fall if it's appreciable or depreciable. I feel like it's a class of its own. But I do think it's an important conversation to have about soil building and climate resilience and the future of our food supply, the farmers and stewards who are building our soil. It also ties back to that topic of what if you're doing the opposite? What if you're fallowing land and then just leaving it and not putting cover crop and not really tending the land? Kind of the opposite. But yeah, I would just say that there's maybe a few categories within this topic to parse out because how we handle them is going to be different.
Yeah, I definitely echo that with like how you handle it will determine whether it appreciates the soil, appreciates or depreciates. And like getting farmers on land to be able to like literally appreciate that land even more so to build it up against climate resilience. I do feel like, again, though, it is something, the investment for the farmer is on the books is going to be depreciating. It's not things that you can say, hey, my soil is worth, so much, because I mean, we're the one paying for it, so and if we like leave that long-term tenure, it's not like we get to sell that soil or sell that like orchard or something to think, there's always a life to the it's not like just development land value. So it is very much a class of its own, soil and how it's going to be used. Hard, yeah, sorry to throw that more in, makes it even more complicated, but yeah.
Well, but like to that point, Nathaniel, like there are different mechanisms that can be used in leases to account for like things like the way that an orchard's value has a bell curve. And I've seen different clauses. I don't know if this is something to legislate per se. I think we were a little bit more focused on appreciable assets and kind of how to create what many people kind of call equity building leases, of which they're rare. And the East Coast is doing it a lot better. There are some organizations that have built equity building leases. There's an organization called Equity Trust that has an okay one. I still have some questions about whether it's building equity. There's another one that I'm not remembering the name of right now that apparently has a better one. I just learned a little bit about yesterday that I could dig up. But this is the question about whether it's legal in California and the Subdivision Map Act question. Can we create a lease that allows a tenant farmer to own a house or a barn on a property that they lease and actually be able to sell that asset or appreciate that asset separately from the land? So I think that like before going too much further, like I just need that question answered, and then I'm like off to the races on how we can create more equity building leases. And we can also look to the community land trust community for some of their structures, because they are doing this work. And I don't like know if they've run into this Subdivision Map Act question. which isn't insurmountable. It just requires a subdivision. So,
Are
and that
you
is often hard.
are you saying
Yeah.
like not just a house, but maybe like a well? And would that be like, I mean, some of the, the things that we're talking about aren't going to move.
Yeah.
So that's
The
the
things that aren't going to move.
that's the difficult piece of like,
Mhm.
hey, if you leave, it's that's staying. And how do we differentiate those things? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
And
the
there's,
question.
yeah, because there's other approaches too, right? So a clause that I often use, it's basically a buyout clause. So you can say like for a capital improvement that, you know, isn't a home, you know, like a well or even fencing or, you know, something that's permanent or semi-permanent to the property, but does depreciate that in the event that the lease is terminated, you're owed the remaining value after depreciation of the asset. So it's like it's a buyback, or you're owed the like you can structure it however you want. It can say like the market value or whatever too.
I see what you're saying, because then it's like, um, you put that improvement into the land or the property value, and you are owed that.
Yeah, you're owed that back. So it's not, it's like kind of like you owe that asset, but not, because most leases in the state of California will say that whatever improvements you make to the land reverts to the ownership of the landowner upon termination. So this just kind of says, yes, but you have to pay for it. I don't know how we legislate that piece, but the like larger question around equity building leases, like there could be some recommendations that we would build around those. It's possible that we could include like buyout mandates for the public lands and institutional lease bill of rights. That might be something to include there. I don't know how we would mandate it for private landowners.
Well, we have a great place to test out some things.
Maybe then hopping down to that next recommendation to create incentives for long-term agricultural leases. Another recommendation that we have in the report, what might some of those incentives look like?
Or are there other ways to advance long-term leases?
I think our recommendations are like a combination of carrot and stick. So this is one of the carrots. There are a lot of examples from other states on how long-term leases are incentivized. It also will tie into the conversation we'll have in the succession group, how passing on land or business to of an operational farm to the next generation also incentivized. It's usually using taxes, tax breaks and stuff, tax incentives. I wonder if there are other ways that we can create incentives. And keeping in mind too, like this is like we should caveat it, right? Long-term agricultural leases to socially disadvantaged and historically marginalized farmers and ranchers. I think there could be like that. This is a private landowner solution, right? We can create mandates for public and institutional. Another thing that we haven't really talked about, if I can just go like adjacent topic real quick, is speaking of incentives and mandates, we haven't really talked too much about creating a development requirement, like if for every acre that's developed, an acre has to be, for every acre of agricultural land that is developed an acre, or sometimes it even says 2 acres, has to be put into a mitigation bank for agricultural uses. I'm really interested in exploring agricultural mitigation banks and how those could be set up and managed as like incubator farms or more. So if we had a mandate that was like a 1-to-1, every acre would kind of go into a bank that would be serving beginning socially disadvantaged farmers.
That might be something that, of course, it can be discussed and thought through anywhere, but that feels like it's the land access piece of it, right? It's about ensuring land availability, I think, Leah. And then, of course, all of these things come on layered on to that availability. Just a thought to that. Thank you for highlighting that, though. I wanted to note really quickly that I believe Emily has to hop out at 11:30. So no need, of course, Emily, to jump in here, but just did want to make sure that if there was anything you wanted to direct our attention to, Emily, that you had the chance to do that.
Yeah, I believe at our last meeting, we were discussing the definition of land tenure. So I was just curious where we landed on that. And then my other question was just for when our next meeting is.
Let me quickly pull up that definition of land tenure. If you want to, Megan, address maybe the next meeting question, and I can read that off.
We don't yet have a second follow-up meeting set for this group, but it will be sometime after the February full task force meeting. So when I reach out to folks, likely tomorrow, I need to pull folks that are in other subcommittees as well. And so just so I can ask you one time what your availability is. I suspect, I don't know, Caleb, what's your sense? Maybe we'll look to get this group together in March sometime.
Yeah, I'm thinking mid to later March would probably be good to give us some time to kind of work through all of the thoughts and discussion that we've had today.
Okay.
Here, Caleb, I will send you this. I'll pop it in. Yeah, it's quite, as with many of our descriptions of terms, Emily, that you'll see when you do review the draft that was shared out with task force members yesterday. There's quite a lot of detail there, right? It's kind of a long explanation, but I'm going to send you the really quick. I'll send it to Caleb so you can put it up on a slide. And then I'm going to send the little next kind of caveat piece of that that I'll put there too. Because if you only had that, you might think it's kind of not at all. Here we go. Here's the next little. And all of this text I just pulled directly out of the draft report that was shared with you all. So of course, if you have any immediate thoughts now, love to hear them. And in addition, really appreciate your continued thoughts on it so that we can make revisions to that draft language.
Yeah, I see you have your hand raised.
I was just hoping to pose a question before Emily has to jet. And excuse my ignorance here. Is there any kind of adjacent existing documentation for when tribes gain access to land that they are not given full ownership over, like through some kind of a lease or other tenure arrangement? Is there a broad kind of bill of rights that tribes have when accessing that land, or does that have to be negotiated individually each time?
Yeah, off the top of my head, the best practice would be for each piece of land or agreement. The tribes, they do have their tribal resolutions for their governance, so it could be within that. But other than, because you mentioned like Bill of Rights, So I just wanted to mention the tribal resolutions. That's kind of serves as that. But yeah, it would be applied as you know, from my understanding, right? I can ask around as well.
Do you think that it would make sense to have an overarching tribal tenant bill of rights, or is each tribe's kind of resolutions going to be so unique that it wouldn't be appropriate to kind of put a broad brush over it?
Yeah, I think it would be up to the tribe, but maybe providing like a template of some sort, as a suggested, what were you calling it? Tenant bill of rights? Yeah.
Yeah, I've just been hearing from, the different tribal representatives that we've had, like just the frustrating process of having to negotiate kind of basic understanding and terms each time. Yeah, I wonder if there is, a at least a general few terms that could be sketched out that would be appropriate and would apply to most situations that would support the tribes in advocating for their rights.
Yeah, it's not very common for tribes to have tenants, non-tribal tenants. Usually it's like a tribal member or a descendant. So that's something I have to dig into a little bit more, because that's my familiarity is within my own reservation, but I can reach out to the other bands as well to see how they practice.
And just to be clear, in this case, I'm speaking to when the tribe is the tenant and has to lease or have some other arrangement where they have access to the land, but it's not held by the tribe.
Yeah, I'm not too sure about that because I haven't really been a part of anything like that. So what I can do is seek out that information. That's not something my individual band practices. We don't do that. We have Emily. We have tenants within our economic development adventures. We do have a growing operation on our reservation, and we do lease out to the growing tenants the grow houses, and that's about it. It's not like a living quarters or anything like that. So it's not common for us to be the tenant, but to have tenants on the reservation. But I'll dig in more, Leah. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. That'd be really interesting to learn about. And just this came across my desk today, but we were talking about this yesterday, so sorry for just taking up a couple more minutes. But the Placer Land Trust was just awarded a project advancement grant of $56,000 from the California Council of Land Trusts for the Owl Creek Land Back and Equitable Access Project. It's a 308-acre property along Owl Creek in Forestville. And this is like kind of what we were talking about with like it'll fund project management and planning. So the California Council of Land Trusts does have a grant mechanism like this, to kind of prepare for acquisition, to prepare for land back, and some of the associated costs. But I certainly think that, this is probably a pretty small drop in the bucket, the amount of funds. I'm certain that there could be more funds put that direction. But there are sources of funds that are trying to get at that issue that we had highlighted yesterday. So I'd be curious to hear from CCLT and any tribal entities that have tried to go out for that money successfully or unsuccessfully, whether there are improvements to be made.
I'm gonna have to jump off now. Thank you all. I'll be talking to you soon, I'm sure. Take care.
Thank you.
Emily.
Thanks a lot, Emily.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. I didn't mean to stop the conversation on the previous point. Just wanted to make sure that there was a chance if there's anything to turn to.
I will hop maybe to this, but if you guys would you guys like to spend some time looking at the land tenure definition and kind of evaluating and providing feedback on that? Okay. Then I think we could maybe chat about these two recommendations as well. I think these ones might be a bit clearer and have a bit more substance to them, but still want to get your initial feedback and build them out in any way that we can. The first one being to increase access to legal support and fund technical assistance providers who kind of act as those neutral mediators to assist with contract and relationship development. Want to see if there's any sort of initial thoughts or feedback, particularly around whether kind of that, how that increased access might be attained and what that funding for technical assistance providers might look like, who it might come from, kind of those ideas as well, if you have them.
Since I work in the space, I guess I'll speak up again. Nate, feel free to like step in. I feel like I'm talking a lot this session. There's kind of two buckets here. So there's like technical assistance providers. These are organizations that are often nonprofit organizations, agricultural service providers that are specialists in specific agricultural business that offer support. And so organizations getting support to continue to do technical assistance like California Farm Link that does this work. But then there is still very much a need to help farmers pay for expert advice, right? So it's kind of rare that those folks are going to have in-house legal counsel. There are some, and they need more funding too. But, you know, farmers sometimes just need to go to a lawyer or, you know, an accountant, you know, someone to seek out expert advice. And so that would be more of a direct to farmer grant program or a pass through organizations to be able to fund subsidized subject matter expertise. So kind of two things that can be related. There's another issue that I'll just flag here, which is that we have a lack of those types of service providers and expertise that are familiar with agricultural businesses. And so it's sometimes is hard to find the appropriate and affordable expertise that a farmer is looking for. I can't tell you how many lawyers I've interacted with that are still lawyers, but do not understand agricultural leases and are advising clients on agricultural leases when they themselves could use an education. So, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I echo everything Leah is saying. That is why we had to start Ujama Farmer Collective and are, you know, really looking at those, you know, gaps in where are the farmers, you know. I feel like I don't want to say I'm tired, but I don't take it as a compliment anymore when service providers or folks tell me, hey, that is a really good question, like you need to ask a lawyer. And like when you end up being when you're pushing the line, when you're trying to get things done for the first time in the area, first time for, folks that, most of the time don't have that agriculture lens and understanding, and that is going away deeper and deeper. So I do think like, getting funds to the technical service providers and intermediaries that are, connecting with the farmers to understand their, needs and how we can pay for those and like what are those dollar amounts, but also like working with, you know, more lawyers and more specialized in agriculture and these equitable agreements. I mean, Selk comes to mind, and like through Ujama Farmer Collective, that is how we've been able to build out and start to build out our tenure program is through FarmLink and through Selk. So it's just a example of like how we've got to fill those gaps and bring the things together because they don't always look the same. And when you go from talking about farming to then looking at housing in the next scenario, or like in the next instance, it's some people like then don't, or they know one about one or the other, and like it just makes it difficult. So I do think funding towards those legal services is really key, because getting in touch with the state can be easier. You can get a hold of somebody maybe, but they're really not set up to give you that business and legal advice. They can explain or help with filing certain things, but there really isn't like free legal advice. It's very much, here's these forms and you can read it as much as you want, and you still might not get the full understanding. So echoing the things that it was saying earlier with being able to provide it in all the different languages in a culturally appropriate way. Like there's a lot of times where these things are held in such obscure offering or like meetings that are just way out of the way of the people that need it, and making sure that folks are able to access those things. I do feel, just to end that thought of like, I feel pretty lucky that I got kind of like initiated in these circles of nonprofits and like access to all these different resources, but I definitely feel lucky and not like I'm the normal case scenario. And like I don't see a lot of farmers, I'm like, well, what about this and what about that? And they're like, oh yeah, I've heard you talk about that before. And I'm like, it all depends on where you're at. And it's like, it's hard to, you almost have to take in all the services at one time if you're just starting out. But that's more from starting out. I will say that when we're thinking land acquisition, there's, it's hard to look at that from the beginning farmer and like, hey, how can the farmer that is just starting get access to land? And I do feel like, that's the shorter to longer term tenure that helps build in those spaces as well, so they have that time to understand. There's a couple of great organizations throughout California doing some of that work. But again, we're all kind of tied in with the folks, so the other organizations. So making sure we've got continued funding to reach out to the farmers and get those farmers to the resources they need, and fill in the gaps that we're talking now.
So I have a question of sorts. I think between the past two comments, so Nathaniel and Leah, I heard money directly to farmers to fund subject matter expertise. Funding more service providers who actually have the knowledge in that context specifically. And then also, Nathaniel, you kind of just mentioned the state and how there's some room for the state to be providing resources. So I'm curious in this specific context, if any of those three feel like the best route. I think there's pros and cons to all three of those pathways to getting more of these technical assistance resources out there. I'm guessing that money directly to farmers to then go turn around and like purchase a private service is probably not. I'm guessing there's limitations to that within like the state, granting and funding processes. So yeah, just kind of wanting clarification around that if you all have a preference.
I think
Usually, oh, sorry.
no, I just wanted to say for the last one about the like state, I think I was more saying like their job really isn't to, advise you on your business. So it is almost like I would rule them out of being able to really provide these resources unless it's just connecting more with the organizations that are doing it.
Okay.
We have, on a limited basis, been able to provide a kind of pass-through through what we would call like subsidized technical assistance or like subsidized access to service providers. So through one of my educational programs, the Regenerator, as the farm teams meet certain program milestones, they're eligible to receive a total of $1,600 over the course of a year to pay service providers to assist them in developing their succession plans. That currently is not funded by any federal or state grants. So having something like that be able to be funded by a state funding source would be really great. I think that there's, like the small business development centers, there's certain expertise that they can provide. I don't know exactly what recommendation I would make. They certainly don't. They're not each one is created equal. So some have agricultural specialists and some do not. Making sure each one did would be super. And then supporting the organizations that are providing these services, organizations like Sustainable Economies Law Center and FarmLink, and there's many that are providing different types of subject matter expertise, not even just specific to landowner-tenant relationships. One organization that's decently funded is the California Agricultural Mediation Program. We're specifically calling out mediators here. CalAmp does a really good job, and FarmLink works in collaboration with them to develop leases and then mediate on conflict. So, welcome back, James.
Thanks.
Just in time.
Yeah, I got some things wrapped, and I was like, I'm going back in. I would echo all those things. I think we, like KTA, has worked with CalAmp to help navigate disputes of a robust set and kind of type. So there's I think the one thing too that I think is I think creating more resourcing to go to technical assistance providers will be largely it will be disproportionately impactful in terms of how it can help individual producers and growers. Coordination is an important piece too. Like I think there's a little, I mean, all of the TA world is starting to want to have more kind of explicit coordination around who's best at what and how do we do soft handoffs between organizations. But yeah, I'd agree with everything that Leah said. Like, and I think, yeah, I'll stop there.
I do feel like the money towards service providers is like the most I guess logical way in my head to go with, because the state wants to see those numbers from there. The service providers are able to do the work that the state cannot. And like, I guess looking at what we can do to create more of a fund, which has kind of been thrown around a bit, that is like we're able to you know, look towards this fund to say, hey, that can fund these different projects that are you know, working to get that equitable land tenure done. And it can be, I don't want to say more flexible, because it does, you know, I'm just learning more and more that, like, you know, all these things are, the ask has to be upfront, but then, you know, numbers of farmers that come in and like actual numbers of what has happened with those dollars can get it can get really like far away from the farmer and the producer in that case. So it's like just thinking of how do we make these processes like how do we create a line or create a strong enough network that the people that are needing it are getting it in the most timely way. Like just, you know, thinking acquisition is such a tricky process, and if you're thinking ahead and you're like, hey, I want to buy land in 3 years, it's like, great, that's, you know, you're starting at the right time. But if it's like, hey, there's you know, this property ready, or like, you know, we've got a timeline on a grant, or you know, I'm losing my access, it does seem just how to link the technical service providers are very linked and able to like somewhat make these handoffs, but the farmers and like, yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm thinking out some concerns there, but just it makes sense.
Well, Nathaniel, I'm hearing a little bit of maybe that there's like, even despite this, there might need to be some other kind of more discretionary pool of resources that can go kind of like in my mind, I'm using the term catch all, but they're like for when things fall through potentially with the technical assistance provider of some kind, that maybe there needs to be like an additional backstop of resources available. But I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth. But that's, as you were saying, that's kind of what I was thinking of. It's like TA providers, like the ecosystem of support that exists needs to be more robustly resourced. And maybe there's space to discuss something else too, in case, you know, people aren't able to access those things.
Yeah, and I think that it's like a lot of time, I mean, to be real, it's like I didn't have access to the resources until I had said land to think about or work on, or money to think about working on. So it's like if you're still at not still, but like if you're at this beginner stage, or you're, just working with the lease that you've got, how do you get in? I guess how do you get in without a real problem and make it more of, yes, this like catch all of like, hey, I need a one time with a lawyer or a bookkeeper to, catch me up to speed, and it's not as extensive as a whole, you know yeah, I don't know. I do think that the catch-all is what I was thinking of, like the things that we can't foresee. I know that crossing water and legal, or like environmental and legal at the same time. Like when I'm thinking legal, maybe I would apply for a planning grant or something, and then it's, for your entity, not for entity and water and, real estate market. So that more quote unquote catch-all, helps it be more flexible to the different services that need to be provided. So I don't know.
It's all really helpful looking at the time now and wondering if staff can continue thinking through some of these things and considering how they could lead to different kinds of proposed recommendations that then, of course, you all can work on and help develop. Should we pass it to Megan to close out, or did you have?
I think maybe just recapping some very initial kind of next steps, hearing the idea to create a new working group focused on kind of that tenant farmer bill of rights. Perhaps I think we can send a follow-up email to kind of garner feedback and availability. Perhaps a working group between Leah and James, and if not, maybe looking to some other task force members that might be willing to help out in that thought work. Also, kind of regarding that initial. Sorry, Leah, go ahead.
I was just gonna let James know that I may have volunteered you for that.
Thumbs up.
And then kind of regarding that insurance point, hearing maybe a need to look at some of those new insurance rules to kind of see their kind of effectiveness and an impact. And then hearing a need to get some clarity on the Subdivision Map Act and how that may relate to equity building leases. Just kind of highlighting those initial next steps and seeing if there's anything maybe that I missed that we want to make sure we cover.
I did find the name of the lawyer and I just emailed you all.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna say we'll follow up with Leah on a couple things. And I just wanted to note too that a couple of things were mentioned over the course of the meeting that related to other working groups, like the public lands working group and the tax working group. And so we, we'll filter kind of all of these topics and locate them in the right place. So those are captured as well.
Great. Megan, you want to take it away?
Sure, you did a great job there, Caleb. And then we'll look to reconvene the group as a whole, probably late March timeframe. Quite right. Materials will be posted to the project website here. We may have one public comment. Let's just pause to see if there's public comments. If you're joining us and you would like to give public comment, you can just pop your raised hand feature. Use your raised hand. Okay. Not seeing any come through. Our next slide just reminds us of an upcoming Sustaining Natural and Cultural Resources Committee meeting on February 6th, and then of course our full task force on the 12th and the 13th. So we look forward to seeing a lot of you there in person. We'll have just a handful of folks joining us on Zoom for that one. Wow, we keep moving forward. Got a lot of work to do. That was a really robust discussion today, everyone. Thank you for your contributions. That was wonderful. Cool.
Everybody.
Okay,
Thank
enjoy
you.
lunch. We will see you
Thanks,
later.
everyone. Bye.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks,
Bye.
y'all. Take care.